I have two of them. One of them is, I always take the choice that's going to lead to the best story. And that's anything that we're going to do. So you get two choices, you go with the one that's the best story. One time I ended up in a country music video. That's an entirely different story. But I was like, shit, that sounds like it'll be a great story one day. It's out on YouTube. Every now and again, my students, I teach high school, they find it, and that's absolutely fucking hilarious. So that's out there. One of the other ones that I do is I come back to the idea that you have to become comfortable being uncomfortable. That's my other mantra. Like anytime I'm going through something, I try to think about the idea of trying to be comfortable being uncomfortable. So then the next time when I'm in an uncomfortable situation, at least I'm prepared in some way for feeling uncomfortable. So, two mantras for you. Go out there, look for the story, and then be comfortable being uncomfortable. And so the story that I thought of, because you guys were talking about this, I have a lot of wanderlust. I like to go out and do things, I like to go places, everything like that. Ever since the pandemic, that entire concept got fucked. And so I got stuck in Gainesville, and I was like, I thought I had everything. I thought I had seen everything in Gainesville. Because one of my other quotes, I'm an English teacher, I love quotes. Henry David Thoreau said, I went to the woods to live deliberately, to put to life all that was not, to put to rout all that was not life, and not when I came to die, discover I had not yet lived. So, an old buddy of mine from college contacted me, and he's like, hey, I got an idea. I remember you used to rock climb. How would you like to go caving sometime? And I was like, sure, why not? And because why not? Sounds like it'll be a great story, right? So he's like, all right, well, you know about ropes and things like that. And I was like, sort of. I go up. I haven't really gone down on a rope before, you know, that kind of thing. So I go over to his house in St. Augustine, and we spend like 1 hour where he shows me some basic caving rope work. Then we commence to drinking, and my safety check is done. So I'm like, all right, we've done this for an hour. Now it's comfortable drinking. It's fantastic. And so the whole thing was, though, is that it was a place here in Gainesville that he was training to go and see. And it's a place called Warren's Cave. And it's on Millhopper Road. It's off of Millhopper Road. So you go past San Falasco, go past 75 heading west, and it's back in the woods. And it's actually the largest dry cave system in Florida. There are 4 miles of mapped caves in Warren's Cave system. And I was like, wow, that sounds interesting. So I'm thinking like, cool, we're going to go down and do this. Like, this is going to be great. So we get to the first section, and you know, they've got a gated area, so you can't go back there, because back in the 60s and 70s, they used to go down there and get drunk and hang out in the cave, which I thought sounded great. So we go down into it, we get into it, we've got all this gear, and the first thing you have to do is you got to drop down this pit. So you just like step off into the abyss, and then just go backwards down into the darkness underground. That was cool. Then you have to climb a rope, and then you got to jump down a disc. And then I experienced the first time of a term that they use in caving, and it's called a squeeze. Yes! Let's talk about becoming comfortable being uncomfortable. All right, so you're underground, and you're walking around, you're like, wow, this is cool, karst, and da-da-da-da-da, and hydrology, and all sorts of, there's a bunch of nerds with us who are giving me all of these things, and those are the 2 words I remember. And so we go down, and then they're like, all right, this is the cashew squeeze. And I was like, all right. And you have to get down on your hands and knees. And then you have to start like kind of, at a couple of points, kind of semi-wriggling a little side by side to get in there. And you're banging your helmet on the top of this little area. And you like, you know, like, hurry, girlfriend, and you're like, ah. And then you get out to this other section. And it's like, that's when it starts opening up. And so you start going through all these. Now the thing that I was not told, and my friend, he knows me very well because he's known me for 30 years, is that I will just go along with the story. I'm like, fuck it, let's do it. And forgot to mention the fact that I'm going to be underground for 7 hours, and I'm only going to be able to stand up after I dropped off of that rope, and then once I went into the cashew squeeze, you are never able to stand up again. Ever. And so you're down there and you start like military crawling, you're on your hands and knees, you got knee pads, you got all this other stuff, you're going through it. And we're going to a place called the Sand Room. And I was like, all right, once again, sounds cool, this would be great. And we get to the second squeeze. Now the second squeeze, I'm not exactly a big person. And the second squeeze, you have to turn entirely sideways and then move yourself down through that. And it has an S-turn in it in the process. And the whole time, if you're any kind of spatial thinker, you're thinking about the idea that there's probably about 80 feet of rock that is Florida rock that likes to collapse from time to time. And then there's just earth underneath you. And sound is dampened down there. because there's all these pockets from all the water, and then there's the dirt, and so sound just disappears. So we go through that curve, and at one point my foot got caught, and I couldn't move, and there are people behind you and people in front of you, so you just have to keep moving, but also my foot gets caught, and the guy in front of me stops for a second. He had a little bit more room, and he's like, this really isn't for everyone. And I was like, this is a fantastic time to bring that up. Because I have no idea what the fuck I am. I'm underground, and I'm now semi-stuck, so I have to get through it. But I had a mini panic attack, as a normal person would. Thank you. Yes, exactly. And I remembered that you have to try to become comfortable being uncomfortable. Right? And then you get out of the squeeze, and I won't go into the whole birth canal thing, but you can do that yourselves. And you get out of that, and you're like, I made it. And we get all the way to the sand room, and we're doing this, and it's cool and everything, and we're on our way back eventually. There's all sorts of weird things that happen. But I was also in front on the way back for some dumbass reason. Now, thankfully, on the way back, there are arrows at the big intersections that point, like, this is how you get out. So I was like, all right, I can follow arrows. So I'm moving. I want to get out of there. So I'm moving. Right? I'm like, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And after a little while, I said something to the people behind me, and I didn't hear anything in return. And I kept going for a second, and I was like, no, really? And there were no headlamps behind me.
Oh my God.
And I'm completely alone in this little cave that is only about like this tall, so I could maybe like kind of on my hands and knees like look around, and I'm completely alone. And I remember the first rule of any kind of adventure in the wilderness, like stay put. Don't keep moving. Just stay where you are. I was sure I'd followed arrows. I was like, all right, fine. So I'm going to sit here. So I sat there for a little while, and it was disturbing. Now, at the same time, I've always really wanted to try a sensory deprivation chamber. And here is a natural one. And so I'm sitting there for a second, and then I got up the courage, and I reached up, and I turned off my headlamp. And it was perfect darkness. Like absolutely nothing. And there was no sound, because everything's just getting absorbed. And I started to lean into that, and I was like, from the earth we come, and to the earth we're going to go back. Like, when am I ever going to have this experience again, except if I'm ever in a box? Right? You know that monologue, right? Okay, good. And so, if I'm in a box and you're dead, you won't know that you're in a box. And if you're in a box and you're alive, well, then you'll be dead. So I decided to lie there for a second. So I actually turned and I put my head down directly on the ground. And I just sat for a second. And I read an article about the quietest room in the world. And it's actually like a room where it's got airplane cables and everything like that, and the thing that you put in there is suspended, and it's all sound dampened, and people go mildly crazy from being in there, because after a while you start to hear the circulation of your blood. And I kind of really wanted that. And so I was lying there, and I don't know if I actually did, or if it was maybe the water underneath me that was eventually going to make this ground collapse and fall into it. The sinkholes that make you love Florida. And so, but sitting there in that darkness and thinking about this, that you could go someplace and experience that darkness and that silence that you're not going to come back from eventually. But this time you do. And that was wild. And it was right here in Gainesville. I didn't have to travel very far. I didn't have to do very much. But I did have to, of course, become a little comfortable being uncomfortable. And so eventually I was sitting there for a while and I didn't see them, and I kind of got myself turned around after. I stayed there for a while because this was an opportunity you don't get very often. And then I went back, and those dipshits had just found another side panel and like a little cave, and they were exploring it. And my buddy was there, and they were laughing at me like, we wondered when you'd come back. That kind of thing. They had the rope for me to get out. And so it was great. We got together, I got back, I made it through both of the squeezes, and you walk out from underground, and this was in July in Florida, and so underground was kind of comfortable and nice, temperature-wise and everything like that. There's no creepy crawlies down there because there's no food sources. And then you come out, and you're like, and then the mosquitoes just bite you all in, sync all at once, and you're like, this is Florida, I'm back. And I was able to get out from underground. So, coming back to those ideas. Number one, go for the story. Whatever it might be. Might be a little bit terrifying, go for the story. Number two, become comfortable being uncomfortable. And when you can, go out to the woods and put to rout all that was not life, and not when you came to die. Discover you had not yet lived. Thanks.